Coaching requirements. All coaches every year must go through the NFHS courses, the concussion course, heat acclimatization course, sudden cardiac arrest course. New for the 2019-20 school year is protecting students from abuse course. All four of those courses can be found at NFHSlearn.com. Every coach in your program, from volunteer to paid, must go through that course each year prior to coaching in a practice or contest. As a reminder, all coaches must be CPR and AED certified. This must be done every 2 years. Your certification for both CPR and AED is a 2-year certification. So please check with your athletic director or your certification cards to see if you're due for a new certification for this school year. Sportsmanship. League office, we continue to see issues with sportsmanship by players and by coaches. We want to take some time this year in our rules presentation to put some questions to you coaches to get you to think about some things as it pertains to your team and your behavior for sportsmanship. One of the first things we want you to think about is, how often do you discuss this with your team? Do you make sportsmanship a priority? Do you take time each day to go through with your athletes your expectations, how you want them to handle adverse situations? Or do you put it on the back burner and let it become a reaction when it happens? If you put it on the back burner and let it become a reaction when it happens, you know there's a high chance that the result is not going to be what you expect. Understand too, we're working with teenage athletes. No matter how much you go over something and how clearly you set your expectations, you're still going to run into a situation where a kid's going to make a poor decision. What we don't want is one kid's poor decision to lead into multiple kids' poor decisions and have multiple kids ejected from a contest due to one incident. We continue to see an increase in team displays of poor sportsmanship throughout the year. One kid making a mistake is one thing. Multiple kids making the same bad decision at the same time escalates the situation tremendously. Take time, discuss this with your team, set your expectations, let them know what will and will not be tolerated. Two other questions we want you to think about is, if your team doesn't win, and obviously everybody wants to be a winner, and everybody wants to win every time you step foot on the competition field or court. But if you're not to win, or if you are to win, how do you want people to remember your teams? When the game's over, during the season, when you leave the sporting event, years to come, how do you want people to remember your teams? Obviously, everybody wants them to remember their teams as playing hard, consistently playing hard, giving it their all the coach speak you can throw out. But what is it about their character you want people to remember? No matter how difficult the situation was, they held their heads high and handled it well? Or do you want people to remember that whenever something went wrong or whenever there was a chance, they showed poor displays of character and poor displays of sportsmanship? You set the tone. You're the leader. You lead them in drills. You lead them in team activities. You lead them through contests. You also lead them down the correct path of sportsmanship. Take time to speak to your team about sportsmanship daily. Make this part of what you do. Make this part of your culture and your expectations. And remember, sports, they don't build character, they reveal it. What character will you and or your players reveal when times get tough? What character will you reveal when things are going your way? It's all part of the educational-based athletics process. Teaching skills, winning, developing the athlete, developing the person. Sportsmanship falls under the latter, developing the person. This is something they can carry with them as they go through life. Make it a priority each day to set your expectations on sportsmanship. Okay, athlete ejections. If you have an athlete ejected, remember, they can remain in the bench area during the contest. This becomes a supervision issue. If you ever have an official or someone that tells you your athlete has been ejected, they must leave the facility, they must leave the venue, that is not correct. Athletes are allowed to stay in the bench area if they've been ejected. They cannot return to play, but they can stay in the bench area provided they do not become a hindrance in the remainder of the contest. Also remember, any athlete ejected from a contest becomes immediately ineligible. They will remain ineligible to compete until they've been cleared by the league office. And cleared means serving their suspension. Failure to do so will result in you playing an ineligible athlete. Some changes this year to length of suspensions. Football, swim, lacrosse, and cheer will remain at 1, as it has been for many years. Golf, volleyball, and wrestling, because they use play dates and not number of contests, will remain at 2. New this year is a 3-game suspension. This is the minimum. We've increased the number of games allowed in these sports. Therefore, we feel like the percentage needs to go up. The executive committee changed this past May. The sports of basketball, baseball, softball, tennis, and soccer. An ejected athlete will carry a minimum 3-game suspension during the regular season. These minimums, the 1, 2, and 3 games for the sports, are during the regular season. If you look down at the bottom, playoffs have been changed to where an ejection in the playoffs carries a minimum next game suspension. So your minimums of 1 game, 2 games, and 3 games in the respective sports are for the regular season. Should you get ejected in the playoffs, all sports fall under a minimum next game. Understand, these games are set at the minimum. If you are ejected and it is a severe ejection, you're not going to get the minimum. If your ejection is a minor ejection or a routine ejection, chances are it's going to be set at the minimum. I can tell you, coaches, to share with your athletes, disrespectfully addressing a game official is not going to get you the minimum. Disrespectfully addressing a game official is going to exceed the minimum. So if you're in the sport of basketball, baseball, softball, tennis, or soccer, and you disrespect a game official, you're going to get more than 3 games. In golf, volleyball, and wrestling, you're going to get more than 2 dates. In football, swim, lacrosse, and cheer, you're going to get more than 1, because those are minimum. Reminder, the ejections are served at the level the ejection occurs. If you're ejected from a sub-varsity contest, you must sit the number of games you're suspended for at the sub-varsity level. And a second ejection in the same sport will equal a 2-week suspension. And remember, that can carry a huge punishment, especially if you've got a basketball team that over 2 weeks has got 7 games scheduled. And you're going to miss 7 contests, because that's the minimum, is 2 weeks for your second ejection in basketball. Okay, ejection of coaches. Unlike players, coaches, if you get ejected, you must leave the facility or the stadium immediately, and you cannot return. A number of issues in the last few years where coaches have been ejected and they weren't quite sure they had to leave the facility or stadium. We want to make it clear, if you're ejected, you must leave the facility or stadium immediately and not return. No questions asked. Whether you agree with the ejection or you disagree with the ejection. If you're ejected, leave. The best thing you can do as a coach when you've been ejected is to stop arguing, stop questioning it, accept it, and move on. In many cases, the minimums for coach ejections and the fine and the suspension are increased once the coach becomes ejected. You can do yourself a huge favor by leaving at that point in time. Remember, as a coach, too, you cannot return to coach at any level until cleared by the league. If you're in a tournament, first game's on a Friday at 8 o'clock at night, and you get ejected, you don't get to go back out there Saturday and just start coaching because you haven't heard from the league office. If you haven't heard from us, that means you haven't been cleared. And we will not be communicating this with you. We'll be communicating with your AD or principal. So if they've not heard from us, then you're not cleared. And you assume that they haven't heard that you keep sitting out. Changes this year to coach ejections. Executive Committee approved in April. The coach ejection will now carry a minimum 2-game suspension, and the fine will remain at $300. In the past, the minimum ejection for coaches has been 1-game suspension and $300 fine. The minimum game suspension for coaches is increased to 2, and the fine will remain at $300. Remember, that fine goes to the school. The school decides they want to make you pay them for it. That's between you and your administration at your school. Now, that being a 2-game suspension, this is going to be crucial for you because, remember, the suspensions of a coach must be served at the same level where the ejection occurs. If you're a varsity level head coach or assistant coach and you're ejected from a sub-varsity game, you're going to be fined $300 and you're going to be suspended from the next 2 sub-varsity games. What that means is you will not be able to coach in any contest until you have served a 2-game suspension at the sub-varsity level. For example, you're helping your assistant coach out on a Thursday night, or your JV coach out on a Thursday night. You get ejected from the Thursday night JV contest. Your varsity team plays on Friday. Your varsity team plays Saturday. Your varsity team plays Monday. You won't coach in any of those games. Your JV team plays again on Tuesday. That'll be your first game suspension at the JV level. You will have missed the Friday, the Saturday, and the Monday varsity games. You sit the JV game. Your JV plays again on Thursday. You sit again. And then your varsity team plays on Friday. Now you're eligible to coach because you've served your suspension at the level where it occurs. So you've got a 2-game suspension at the level it occurred, but you are ineligible to coach in any other contest between there. So essentially, because you were ejected from a sub-varsity game, and because the way your schedule worked out, you actually missed 5 contests total. Be mindful of that moving forward. There's no reason why varsity coaches should be ever ejected from a sub-varsity game. There's no reason why you should be ejected from a varsity contest. But if you are going to get ejected, understand the consequences of that ejection. And remember, if you're ejected from the final game of the season, the penalty is a minimum $500 fine. Okay, some reminders on ejections. The athlete's actions can get them suspended for up to 365 days. Rules and regulations do not allow any suspension to exceed 365 days. Obviously, 365 days suspension are reserved for severe actions of athletes or coaches. Rules and regulations also call for an athlete that is suspended for 365 days will result in the program being put on immediate probation, which will take you out of the playoffs immediately. Any athlete that leaves the bench during an altercation, they're going to get ejected from the contest, and that's going to result in a suspension. If they leave the bench during the altercation and they become involved by putting their hands on someone, even if it's in a goodwill gesture to remove them from the activity on the floor, if they put their hands on someone from the other team, grab them around the waist, pull them back, shove, punch, they're going to be ejected for multiple games depending on the level of their involvement. As we spoke about in the previous slide, disrespectfully addressing a game official is going to result in beyond the minimum for suspension. Physical contact with a game official is going to be an ejection and up to 365 days, depending on the severity of that contact. I can tell you more often than not, that is going to err more towards a 365-day suspension. The best thing you can do as a coach for your student athletes is to video every contest start to finish. Wide-angle camera lens so everything can be seen. Instruct your camera operators to keep the camera running during any altercation. The important part of that is, yes, the ones that are guilty are going to be viewed. We're going to know who's guilty. But the most important thing is those that are innocent are going to be able to be cleared. We want to clear the ones that were not involved. We want to clear the innocent. It also allows us to see the level to which the athlete or the coach was involved. Without video to review the severity of the actions, all we have is what is written up. In some cases, what is written up exceeds what the athlete actually did. In some cases, what is written up doesn't meet the actions of what the kid actually did. Video everything so that we can review it and make sure the appropriate suspension is handled down. Remember, sportsmanship's a choice. Your student athletes make it, your assistant coach make it, and you make it every day. Make it a priority to go through this. Make it a part of what you do daily. Okay, medical information. Reminder, the approved healthcare providers who can return a student athlete to play anytime it involves a concussion, those 5, they all must be licensed in South Carolina, an MD, a DO, an AT, a PA, and an MP. Any one of those 5 can return a student athlete to play during a contest when symptoms or signs of a concussion are thought to be there. In absence of one of those 5, student athlete sent off the field for a concussion-like symptom by an official, that student athlete will remain out for the remainder of the game. Other important medical information for you, just as a reminder, last year we went through and implemented the wet bulb globe thermometer. Please be mindful of that as we get started in the 2019 school year. This does not just apply to outdoor or early year activities. This also could be an indoor activity for the early part of the season, of the school year, and also could be involved in the latter part of the school year when the temperatures begin to rise again. All athletes' physicals must be on file with your school, and the date for that physical to be valid is April 1st of 2019. Any physical dated prior to April 1 of 2019 will not be valid this year for your student athletes. Check with your AD to make sure you have an emergency action plan for your facility, and not only for your facility but for each sports season. In many cases, you may use the same stadium that another sport uses, but you may not have every access point open to get into that stadium for your sport that another sport would. So just check with your AD to make sure you have an emergency action plan. Make sure you're aware of it, and it's always a good idea to keep a copy with you in the event something were to happen and you're the only person there to be able to make a decision on how to get the emergency vehicles in. All right, tournaments. We've had an issue in the last couple of years with tournaments and a definition of what a tournament is. Just a couple of things to remind you of. All tournaments, invitationals, and jamborees, they must be sanctioned by our office. Once we get it sanctioned and approved for sanctioning, we post that on our website. If you're participating in a tournament, an invitational, or a jamboree, check our website to make sure that it's been approved as a sanctioned tournament. If you participate in a non-sanctioned event or host a non-sanctioned event, you are subject to penalties and or fines. Don't put yourself in position to get a penalty and or fine by participating in a non-sanctioned event. Any contest in the preseason must be in a tournament that is sanctioned. We've had to call a few schools this past school year and remind them that you cannot host a round-robin invitational in the preseason. If you're going to host an event during that preseason date period, it must be a tournament. That means it must be a series of contests in competition for a championship at which at least first and second place are decided by a final contest. So if you're going to host an event in the preseason, it must be a tournament, it must be sanctioned. And when you submit your application for sanctioning, you must submit your brackets as they are to be played so that we can approve that as an approved tournament. If you have any questions on that, please feel free to call our office, and we'll be glad to help guide you through the process to make sure you get it right. Okay, transfers or ineligible players. The responsibility of making sure that every athlete on your court or field is eligible falls on your principal and athletic director. But it's always a good idea for you to remember what a transfer is and what an ineligible player is so that you can get the information to your AD and not place someone in error. A good thing to do is the first day of tryouts or the first day of practice is to check with every person trying out for your team and just ask one simple question. Who was not at our school from the first day till the last day last year, and who was not at our feeder middle school from the first day until the last day of the previous year? Anyone who was not at your school day one through the final school day of the year before, or at your feeder middle day one through the last school day the year before, is considered a transfer. What that means, if they came in day two, enrolled in your school, and stayed till the end of the year, they are still by rule a transfer. They came in the last week of school, they are a transfer. Do not ask them who was at our school last year. That could potentially put you in a position to play someone who is ineligible due to the transfer rule. Make sure you take time to ask that question. Pass that along to your AD as soon as possible. If you know you have an athlete who's participating in preseason workouts months ahead of your season, who was not at your school the entire year last year, or not at your feeder middle school the entire school year before, make your AD aware so that they can start the process of a transfer. And in the event they're ineligible due to the transfer rule, they still have time to look into any options that may exist for eligibility. If you wait till the last minute, you could put that athlete in potential of having to sit out an extended period of time waiting on eligibility. And remember, to be eligible, that transfer must meet one of the criteria for eligible transfers stated in our handbook. Just because someone's a transfer does not make them ineligible. If they meet one of the criteria that makes them an eligible transfer, then they will be eligible. That is up to your AD and principal to determine whether that eligibility exists. And reminders, if they're not eligible for any reason, they cannot participate in a scrimmage, jamboree, or contest. They can practice, but they cannot participate in a scrimmage, jamboree, or contest. Okay, the 75% rule. With the change of the sports season, opportunity to practice outside of your sports season with your school team, we've seen an increase in questions from coaches and schools as it pertains to the 75% rule. We've also seen some violations where coaches didn't truly understand the 75% rule. They had a thought of what they perceived it to be. We'll take a moment to go through the basics of the 75% rule. Reminder, the 75% rule only applies to when a coach from your school is associated with the outside team. This includes all school employees and volunteer coaches. So if they work at your school or they coach at your school, paid or unpaid, assistant or head, if they're coaching an outside team that has your players on it, your student athletes, the 75% rule will apply to that outside team. If you or one of your coaches or one of your employees coaches an outside team with players made up of other schools, from other schools, or from other states, 75% rule doesn't apply to you. 75% rule applies to outside teams with returning players who dressed for a varsity contest the previous season. If you're coaching an outside team that has players from your school on it, but not one of those players dressed for a varsity contest the previous year, then the 75% rule does not apply to you. It only applies when you're coaching an outside team, or when a coach from your school or an employee from your school is coaching an outside team that contains returning players who dressed for a varsity contest the previous season. The numbers that you're allowed to have on that team are listed in the rules and regulations. It's not 75% of your outside team roster. The numbers you're allowed to have of players who dressed for a varsity contest the previous season on your outside team is in the rules and regulations. So we'll continue with the 75% rule. Here are some examples. Example 1. Soccer is allowed 8 players on an outside team under the 75% rule. So if you go to the rules and regulations and you look at the number of players allowed per sport on an outside team, coached by a coach from your school, a volunteer coach from your school, an assistant coach from your school, or a school employee, in the sport of soccer, that outside team is allowed to have 8 players on that team who dressed for a varsity game during the previous season. So if you're coaching a soccer team as an outside team, and you have 7 returning players on that team who dressed for a varsity game at your school, and 11 players who are on the JV season and never dressed for a varsity game, that outside team will meet the 75% rule because you did not exceed 8 players on that outside team that dressed for your varsity team the previous year. Example 2. Basketball is allowed 3 players on an outside team under the 75% rule. The outside team coached by a coach from your school or an employee from your school has 4 players on it who dressed for a varsity game the previous year, and 7 players who never dressed for a varsity game. This would be a violation. The reason that's a violation is that basketball is only allowed 3 players on the outside team that dressed for a varsity contest the previous year. The outside team in this example had 4 players who dressed for the varsity game the previous year and were on the outside team. Therefore, it would be a violation. As always, if you have any questions as to the legality of your varsity team or your outside team, call our office prior to establishing your outside team. Okay, our final slide before we'll turn it over to your sport commissioner for the rule changes in the NFHS rule book is on open and closed season. A lot of questions on this past year, and seeing a lot of coaches who don't fully understand what they can and cannot do during this time. Remember, if it's an open season, during that open season, you have 20 days of practice. That 20 days is for your use, however you want to use it, however many hours you want to go, however many kids you want to have out there. The only requirement is you must make it open to all students, and it cannot be mandatory for any. If you want to have 200 kids come to your softball practice, great. You only have 20 days with it. During the open season, your school facilities can be used. I have a lot of coaches who aren't sure they can actually use their school facilities during the open season. The open season, 20 days of practice. You to use how you want. School facilities may be used. Open to all students and cannot be mandatory. And a reminder that football and lacrosse, you have pad exemptions during that 20 days that you can actually use pads, and days where you cannot use pads. Make sure you pay attention to your sport-specific rule if you're in football or lacrosse as it pertains to pads. The closed season. During the closed period, a coach cannot work with any athletes. It's on campus or off campus. The only exception to this would be if you're coaching an outside team that has no affiliation with your school. Students are not allowed to use school facilities on their own. Example of this, no open gyms. You can't unlock the gym and say, hey, I can't be in there, but you can go shoot. That's a violation of the closed season. Strength and conditioning activities are allowed. We get a lot of calls. Hey, can we lift weights? Can we run? Can we condition? Absolutely. You can lift weights and run and condition year-round. You just cannot teach sport-specific skills or training during a closed period. Reminder, June and July, they're open for practice. The only exception to that is the dead week around July 4th. And also in June and July, you have 10 dates for team competition in all sports. That wraps up the first part of your rules presentation. I want to wish you all best of luck this year. And as always, if you have any questions on anything we've covered here or any questions on anything that was not covered here, do not hesitate to call our office or have your athletic director call our office. Our number is 803-798-0120. Thank you.
This is the 2019-20 NFHS soccer rules meeting. First few slides we're going to review here in South Carolina are going to deal with rule book corrections. These are corrections that will actually be in the rule book. Next few slides pertain to rule changes that went into effect this year that may not be written correctly in the rule book. So these slides will be new rules, at the same time will be what the corrections you need to make in your book. Rule 224, which is a new change this year, is a correction. You'll see there underlined is what the correction should be in your rule book. This is dealing with a drop ball. Now, when the game's been resumed by a drop ball between any, it should say number of opposing players at the spot where it was last played. And then it goes on to say if the ball is dropped between any number of opposing players, subject to the provisions of 922. Second change in the rule book is Rule 343. This is dealing with the clock being stopped inside the final 5 minutes of the second period, but it needs to also include in the fourth quarter if the game is played in quarters and in the second period of the overtime. So this is a new rule change this year where we're going to stop the clock inside the final 5 minutes of the second period, the fourth quarter, or the second period of overtime if the team in the lead is making a substitute. This is Rule 743, the change there you see in red as well. This is again dealing with the clock being stopped when a substitute by the team in the lead is beckoned to the field in the final 5 minutes of the second period only, second period of overtime, and the fourth period if you play in quarters, which we do not. So this is just really adding the overtime period for our state. Okay, now we get into the 1920 soccer rule changes. Rule 4.3 is dealing with an improperly equipped player. No longer are we going to issue cautions for players that are improperly equipped. And what we're going to do is, if not immediately correctable, that player will be instructed to leave the field when the ball ceases to be in play again. They can be replaced by the coach immediately with a substitute, or the coach can choose to wait to allow them to come back on the field during the next stoppage in play, at which point they'll have to make sure they report to an official and their equipment is satisfactory to the official. In these play pics here, you see an improperly equipped player. The shin guard is slid around to the side of the lower leg and the shoes come off while their player's in running. Neither of these two improperly equipped players are in immediate danger to the player or to anyone else. Therefore, we're going to allow play to continue. When that play will continue until there is another dead ball, at which point this player will be asked to leave the field. And they can be substituted for at that point in time. Another player may enter in their place, or the coach can choose to wait until the next stoppage to allow this player to come back in if they can get the shoe back on and tied or the shin guard slid back to the front. So basically, if they're improperly equipped and they pose no immediate danger to themselves or anyone else, we're going to allow to play on. The result of that play on will stand. Goal, penalty, ball out of bounds, etc. The result of that play on will stand. Once we have a stoppage, we will then get this player off the field and move on from there. Okay, 5-3-1D, advantage signal added now is that the official advantage signal, instead of having to be both arms, can be one or both arms. Again, that is an underswing of one or both arms. Reminder officials, you're going to call out play on, and with an underswing of one or both arms, you're going to indicate a foul which was observed, and you're going to go unpenalized because I'm penalizing the offending team when given advantage to the offending team. In case you were confused, here is what that signal would look like if you caught it in a still shot. One arm underswing there, caught in a still shot on the way up, and just trying to give you a visual of what you can do now, officials. All right, 7-4-3 timeout, and in is new. The clock's going to be stopped when a substitute by the team in the lead is beckoned onto the field in the final 5 minutes of the second period only. This will also include in South Carolina the second overtime period as well. So coaches, if you have a clock operator who traditionally will turn the clock on at the beginning of each half and then stop the clock inside of 2 minutes of each half, just to kind of give everybody in the stands a visual on about how much time we have left. It would be best if you instruct your clock operators that in the second period to stop the clock at 5 minutes, because if there is a substitution by the team in the lead at that point, the official is going to stop the clock. And if we wait till 2, we may be off in time and parents are going to be upset, etc. So best thing to do is just say, hey, stop it with 5 minutes left. That way everybody knows we're under 5. And if there is a stoppage in play due to substitutes of the team in the lead, then it won't have as big of an impact as it would if we let it run all the way to 2. And again, here's just a play pick of what the clock would look like. Home team there, who's wearing a white jersey, solid white for some reason in the play pick, but this would be the don't pay attention to the scoreboard. Let's pretend the visitors are in the lead here. The clock's going to be stopped again in the final 5 minutes with the team in the lead. And same thing as 3-4-3 is the same as the previous 2 slides, just different rule. This one falls under substitution instead of time. And again, inside the final 5 minutes of the second period or the second overtime period, if the team in the lead makes a substitution, we're gonna stop the clock so that nobody can waste time by subbing. Okay, rule 9-2-1 drop off. The change to this rule under 9-2-1 is in black there, written and underlined. Under C, A and B and D remain the same, but under C, the game will be restarted with a drop ball, and then C there is following temporary suspension of play for an injury or unusual situation, and a goalkeeper is not in possession of the ball. So that is the addition to 9-2-1 or drop ball. And here the play picks, you see the goalie's in possession of the ball in 1A. Got a stoppage in play. I'm not going to have a drop ball because the goalie is in possession. And 2A and 1B, the goalie's not in possession, so we're going to have a drop ball following a temporary suspension of play for an injury or unusual situation. Rule 9-2-3 drop ball. The ball is dropped by an official from waist level to the ground. The addition is any number of players may contest a drop ball. This would include goalkeepers. And the referee or a referee cannot decide who can contest the drop ball or its outcome. Another rule for drop balls, 925, a new rule. The ball shall be dropped again if it touches a player before it touches the ground or leaves the field of play after it touches the ground without touching a player. And here you see two visual examples of what we just read you. In A, the ball hits the player before it hits the ground. And in B, it rolls out of bounds prior to a touching player. Another new rule pertaining to drop balls. Drop ball enters the goal without touching at least two players. You're either going to have a corner kick or you're going to have a goal kick depending on who kicked it in the goal. Should a drop ball enter the goal by a player from the defensive team making one kick and it has not touched anybody else, then you're going to go to a corner. And if it's kicked in the goal by an offensive team member, then you're going to kick it, go to a goal kick. And again, both of those scenarios are coming off a drop ball, provided that it does not touch at least two players. This is preventing kids from just ripping a goal shot off a drop ball. And here you see a play pick example of that. Drop ball. Player one in the gray jersey just rips a shot on goal there. Doesn't touch anybody else. And the same here in B. We just talked about this a few minutes ago, but under drop ball 2 is going to say now is temporary suspension due to injury, unusual situation. The game's going to be started by a drop ball. And that is at the point where the ball was when the play was suspended. Again, this is all provided that the ball is not in the goal area and not in the possession of the goalkeeper. Okay, our major editorial changes for the 2019-20 season. Changes under 426, other equipment. Cochlear implants are now legal to be worn as long as the device does not create the threat of injury. So hearing aids worn in or behind the ears, and this is to include the cochlear implants, are all legal. And again, that's provided it does not create a threat of injury to anyone. 1920 soccer points of emphasis. First point of emphasis is the ACL injury prevention. Coaches, just make sure you take time to share with your parents and your athletes and involve your athletic trainers in how they can prevent ACL injuries, what they can do through specialized training. A reminder that ACL injuries can come from a non-contact, such as cutting, pivoting, or jumping. And there's so much information out there. Just take time to spread this information to your parents, to your players, so that they're aware of the potential of ACL injuries and what they can do to help prevent that in the future. Again, these training programs, ton of information out there, but NFHS has a free course on NFHS Learn for ACL injury prevention. I encourage you to have all your players go watch that course, have all your parents go watch this course, and you yourself go watch the course just to pick up some information on what you can do to possibly prevent an ACL injury. In pregame communication between the school administration and game officials, it's encouraged highly that an authorized representative from the school who is hosting the event greet the officials upon their arrival. We often know sometimes this is difficult given the time of game and when the official shows up and getting on the field, but it's always a good idea to have whoever the game administrator is, meet the officials either as they come in the gate or as they enter the playing field, just to make everybody aware of who's who, so that there's no, if there is an issue during the contest, you've already at least had one exchange of pleasantries before we have to deal with the issue. Okay, Rule 5.3, we're going to have state's game officials communicate misconduct to the coaches, score, and other officials when a yellow card or red card is being issued. This is just a point of emphasis to make sure we are doing this across the board. This is simply a notification. This is not a detailed explanation. This is not a opportunity for coaches to plead their case, to argue, or for further dissent on a call. This is This is simply an opportunity and reminder to officials that Rule 5.3 states that you're going to communicate the nature of misconduct to coaches. Number 8, Charlie had a yellow card. Period. And we move on. Again, you see here number 17 is given a yellow card by the official. Official goes over to the coach and says, Coach, 17 given a yellow card. I would encourage you to state the reason why, what letter of the law they violated so that that earned them the yellow card. For example, 17 yellow card dissent, 17 yellow card unsportsmanlike conduct, and then tell them what that was. But this is not a chance for them to challenge or have a long discussion. Just a briefing so they know what's going on, who it was on, and simple explanation just by stating what infraction there was would be very helpful. All right, some soccer uniform reminders for the 1920 season. Reminder of the home jersey. Remember, the home jersey should be a dark color that contrasts in white. And if gray is used as that contrasting color, the shade of gray should be 70% dark or darker for it to be clearly contrast with white. And there is a gray spectrum chart that we will show you on the next slide. A reminder, the visiting team jersey should be an all white. There's no color trim to that. The only thing that can be in color of any time would be manufacturer's logo, any patches or emblems or logos or insignias referencing the school are allowed, or obviously a number. Here you see that gray spectrum chart. Officials, obviously you're not going to be responsible for having this chart and enforcing the spectrum, but if you've got a situation where a team is wearing very light jerseys, you don't think there is a distinct difference between their color and the white, you can tell them to find darker jerseys or we're not playing the contest. In any case, if the contest, if any team wearing an illegal uniform, if the contest can be played, we want to be able to play that contest. But I would encourage all of our officials to make me aware here in our office that someone played using an illegal uniform so that we can address it with the school. Again, the front of the jersey must be numbered in the front, must not be duplicated. There must be a 4-inch number on the front. That includes the jersey or shorts. The color of the number must contrast the color of the jersey of the pants. And the back obviously must be numbered on the back, and again that number must contrast with the color of the jersey. Here's an example of what numbering would look like. The middle picture there has a number on the shorts. Far left would be the front of your jersey, and then the far right would be the back of your jersey with a 6-inch number. This would be a great example, outside of the name of the school or mascot not being on there, of what an away jersey should look like. Solid white. Other items for the uniform: socks, home team, dark socks, contrast with white. The colors do not have to match the jersey. If you want to wear a red jersey and green socks, that is perfectly acceptable. Visiting team must wear all white socks, no stripes, no vertical stripes, no horizontal, no diamonds, no other insignias on there. A manufacturer's logo obviously are okay. Again, officials, we don't want to get into a situation where it was socks or shorts or jerseys. If we can tell a difference between the two teams, we want to be able to play the game, the match. But make me aware of any issues with uniforms and teams illegally wearing uniforms so that we can address that. We don't need to wait till we get to the semifinals or the finals of the year to find out that a team's been wearing a set of jerseys that are not legal by rule all year. Other items will be shin guards must meet the NOXI standard. Time of manufacture should be a NOXI seal and height range on the front of the shin guard. Remember, they're worn. At the edge, no higher than 2 inches above the ankle. They're age appropriate. They're worn under the socks. They cannot be altered. If they're going to wear undergarments, must be of similar length for an individual, a solid color, and they all must be alike if the team is wearing them. And lastly, other items, head coverings. Goalkeepers can wear a soft-billed baseball hat or soft-billed visor. Soft padded headgear is permitted. Of course, anyone wanting to wear medical or cosmetic head coverings or religious head coverings, those must be approved by our state office. Officials, school would have a letter of approval from our office on site to be able to wear the medical or cosmetic or religious head covering. That is it for the 2019-20 online rules presentation. Hope that you have a very successful soccer season. If we can ever help, please feel free to call our office at 798-0120, and that is area code 803. Again, thank you for listening. Best of luck this year. If we can ever help, please pick up the phone and call.